Now let's talk a little bit about what a mind map even is. It's based on an idea that you probably were exposed to at some point called brainstorming. And if you know about brainstorming, you know that if there can be said to be any rules to brainstorming, one of them is that you don't stop to judge the ideas as they come up. You just write them down. You can always go back later and decide to leave something out. That's when the judging comes. At the moment an idea occurs to you, you just write it down. Well, mind mapping is sort of like that, except it adds to it keeping a record of the connections. That is, what idea led to what idea. Ideas don't necessarily come out in any kind of a nicely organized fashion. So a mind map gives you a way to preserve the relationships of the ideas as they come out. You've probably had this experience in talking with friends. You started out talking about President Obama's economic policies, and now you're talking about favorite Italian restaurants. If you can track how things changed, it may be that thinking about Obama's economic policies made you think about poverty. Poverty made you think about crime. Crime made you think about organized crime. Organized crime made you think about the mafia. The mafia made you think about Italians, and Italians made you think about Italian restaurants. There is a connection among all these ideas. It's not necessarily a logical connection, but it is a psychological one. So it is with a mind map. Now let's take a look at some example mind maps. This first one comes from one of Gabriel Rico's classes. Gabriel Rico wrote a book called Writing the Natural Way, and it's a really good book for anybody who has to write, whether we're talking about fiction or nonfiction, but especially for nonfiction writers, that is, college students. There are a number of techniques in that book that would be useful. One of them is this thing of mind mapping. She called it clustering. So this first one is a cluster or a mind map from one of her English comp classes. We have no idea as we look at this mind map what order things came out of the writer's head. What we can say is that there is a pattern to it, a pattern that makes sense to the writer. That's another thing about a map, and one of the reasons I like calling it a mind map. If you draw a map of a place, it makes sense to you, whatever the little symbols are that you use. They don't necessarily make sense to anybody else. I'm not sure that I could follow this mind map, but you know, it's not a map of my mind, and so it's probably useful to the writer. Here's another mind map. This one comes from a guy by the name of Tony Buzan, who wrote a book called The Mind Map Book. I would encourage you to take a look at it if you have any interest in mind mapping. He goes well beyond simply using it for writing. He uses it for a thinking tool in a lot of different ways. What we're looking at is a reproduction of the mind map that he drew as he got ready to write the book. A 300-page book came out of this mind map. So you can use mind maps to organize big projects or little projects. Notice that there are differences between this one and Rico's. In fact, let's kind of go back and compare the two. Gabriel Rico would have people to write in circles and connect the circles. Buzan doesn't even confine you to writing. If it seems more workable to draw something, he would say draw it. You don't have to write in circles, just write on the lines. What they have in common is, as an idea occurs to you, you jot it down and you draw the connection. You can always go back and clean it up later. Here's one that a television producer used in planning a season for the television station where she worked. This one is both a planning tool and a record tool. She went back and made a sort of cleaned up one after the fact in order to keep track of which ideas went into which month or which episode, and that's where the color coding comes in. Yet another one developed by some people that you would think of as being quintessential left-brain thinkers. If you don't know about Digital Equipment Corporation, it was one of the pioneers in computing. It has been bought out, and the company that bought them out has been bought out, so it would be really hard to identify the original pieces of digital, but in their time they were very important to the development of the computer industry. So we're talking here about computer engineers, very logical, left-brain kind of folks. What they were working on, though, was how to encourage teamwork among digital executives, so they needed a right-brain tool to foster that. They went with mind mapping, and this mind map looks very different from anything from either Gabriel Rico or Tony Buzan, but it applies the same principles. This is the end of Part 3. Please move ahead to Part 4.